Have you ever felt disconnected going through brain injury? A lot of brain injury survivors and families often feel very isolated after they have their injury because your whole life changes and suddenly everything's different and you're not able to interact with the world in the same way. Relationships change, jobs change, life seasons change, schedules change once you have doctors and therapies. And, there's just so many pieces of life that changes with brain injury. So it's really easy to feel disconnected from maybe who you were before the injury, from how your life was, and from the people around you. So if you've ever felt isolated or disconnected, I want you to know you're not alone. And today, here for Brain Injury Awareness Month, week 2, we are talking about the power of connection in brain injury recovery. There is always hope, and you are not alone. Hi, I'm Cristabelle Braden, and this is my brain injury podcast, Hope Survives. This is an uplifting podcast to bring hope to your darkest days. As a survivor of traumatic brain injury and multiple concussions and re-injuries, I know what it's like to struggle to find hope. I don't want anyone to feel as alone as I did, and that's why over 10 years ago, I started an online community called Hope After Head Injury, which has now launched into a nonprofit organization called Hope Survives. Hope Survives envisions a world in which every survivor of brain injury and every member of their family are seen, loved, heard, valued, supported, uplifted, and never alone. This podcast is an extension of that, and I'd love to invite you to join along as we explore the realities of life with brain injury, with messages of encouragement, interviews with doctors and professionals, and survivor and family stories. No matter where you're at on your journey, there is always hope. With a little hope, you can make it through today. With a little faith, someday you'll get through the pain. Just a little love is enough to light the way through your darkest night. Hope survives. Hope survives. Hey friends, welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad that you are here today, and I'm so excited about today's episode. It is episode number 101, The Power of Connection 101. It sounds very fancy, like a college class. It's not that. I hope that it's a relatable, encouraging conversation. We have Jasmine, our managing director here, our managing director from Hope Survives, here to talk about her own brain injury journey and the power of connection and what that means to her. And I just know it's going to be encouraging for all of you. But before we get to the interview, I have something that I'm excited to share. I can't believe I forgot last week to acknowledge it was episode 100. It's so crazy because I spent so many years working on this podcast and on Hope After Head Injury. We started back in 2012 and I started the podcast about 5 years ago. And I remember feeling so guilty that I wasn't getting enough episodes out, dealing with my own symptoms and struggles in my own journey at the time. I had times that it was just way too overwhelming to also be able to work on the podcast in addition to my own recovery and other things going on. And I just remember feeling like I wish I could be doing more. I'm not doing enough. That kind of all led into eventually starting Hope Survives. But how incredible is it that episode 100 was like the first official podcast of being a nonprofit? It just felt like the Lord's timing of just the reminder that like we're doing this at the right time. We're in the right place at the right time. Like I could give myself grace for all those times that I felt like I wasn't doing enough or putting out enough podcasts, that it all lined up perfectly. Episode 100 was the first official podcast with the new nonprofit. If you don't count 99, which was our, what's it called? Live stream lunch celebration. This was not planned or intentional. It just happened to line up this way. And it just like really cool. It just felt like one of those little like God winks or so they would say, of just like a reminder that, hey, we're in the right place at the right time. And if you're just finding our podcast, welcome. We have 100 episodes you can go back and listen to. But yeah, not only that, episode 100, but also this month is 10 years since I released the song Hope Survives. That exactly 10 years later, there's just something about round numbers that I like that just feels like official to me. So it's just very cool. And I was so tired last week when I recorded this intro for the last episode. I can't believe I forgot to even mention it. So I had to say it today. And today we're talking about the power of connection. As I mentioned in the intro at the very beginning of this podcast, that it's really easy to feel disconnected going through brain injury. When I first had my injury, my family felt very disconnected. We were not sure where to find resources. We lost friends. It was just a lot. My parents' story is a bit different than mine, but it affected all of us in their own way. And so when I first started the support groups online, it was when I first started to realize that there were other people that were going through brain injury, and it all really grew organically. I didn't set out to be like, hey, I'm going to start brain injury support groups. And, I just started with making a social media page, and people started commenting, being like, hey, I can relate to this. And I was like, well, we should connect. And that's kind of how it all began. The power of connection in brain injury is so important. When I first met somebody else who'd had a brain injury, it changed everything to realize I wasn't the only one who felt like those lights were flickering and bothering me, or this noise was too much, or understands that you can wake up in the morning tired, or the energy it takes to shower, and all of these different things that, are common when you're going through a brain injury, but you feel crazy and like you're the only person that deals with it. If you feel that way, I want you to know you're not alone. You are not isolated. There is hope. And here at Hope Survives, we're here to create safe and supportive places for survivors and families, loved ones, caregivers to connect and to encourage each other. So we just introduced some new programs. We have the Hope After Injury support group that I've been running for years. Now that meets twice a month at a new time zone to accommodate the UK. So we also have an afternoon Eastern time available on the fourth Tuesday of the month. We also have our Hope for Couples group that's starting this month. Make sure you're signed up, hopesurvives.org/couples, if that is of interest to you. We have Hope for Family, which is a group for family members that we're asking, please don't bring your survivor if possible, that it is for family and loved ones to connect with each other, to talk with each other and encourage each other through brain injury. And then in May, we have a new group starting called Found Connection, which is for survivors that maybe don't have a support system, that don't have a community. And that group we're so excited about because Jess, who's going to be facilitating it, she reached out and was like, hey, she's one of our volunteers. And she said, hey, it's really great you're doing these family and couples groups, but what about those of us who don't have either of those? And so that group is called Found Connection, because connection is so important. And we acknowledge not everyone has it in their life, or maybe your lives connections have changed a lot with your injury. Wherever you're at, we want you to know you're not alone. So you can visit hopesurvives.org, as well as check out our workshops. We have a grief processing workshop at the end of the month. And if you're listening to this much later, which I know sometimes you do on podcasts, we probably have new programs and workshops that are up as of now. And all those support groups are still hopefully running. So wherever you're at, hopesurvives.org can connect. So before we get into the conversation, I want to take a minute to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, the Functional Neurology Center, for sponsoring our podcast. The FNC's personalized neuro recovery programs offer hope for those struggling from brain injuries, dysautonomia, vestibular, chronic pain, stroke, movement dysfunction, developmental disorders, PPPD, FND, complex post-concussion, and more. The FNC was founded by Dr. Jeremy Schmo, and we are so grateful for their sponsorship of Hope Survives and the sponsorship of the Hope Survives podcast. So thank you to the FNC for being part of what we're doing. And your slogan is "There is hope." Our slogan is "You are not alone and there's always hope." And that really is what we're here to do. So all that to say, we are so grateful you're listening. Make sure you stay connected with us. You are not alone and there is hope. So let's get into today's interview with Jasmine. I can't wait for you guys to hear her story. I am here with Jasmine, who is our managing director at Hope Survives. So chances are, if you've sent an email in, you have heard back from the amazing Jasmine. She is the brains behind Hope Survives, helping me to stay afloat. Jasmine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No, I'm super excited to be here. And yes, Hope Survives is a wonderful partnership.
Yes. With both of us having brain injuries, maybe each of our, we together create one brain. And maybe, just kidding. So Jasmine, would you introduce yourself a bit to our listeners?
Yeah. All right. Let's do this. I am Jasmine Balignasay-Chavez, and I have spent my career in strategy, operations, and nonprofit leadership. But today I'm here as something else. Someone who's lived through the chaos of a brain injury, who's felt the isolation and found my way back through connection. I know firsthand that connection isn't just about people, it's about survival. It's what pulled me through the darkest moments of my own recovery, and that's really why I'm here. But I'll be honest, my story still feels a little fragile to me. I could talk about it, but sometimes I feel the weight of it in ways that I don't expect. So I've got my tea, I've got my handkerchief nearby, and we're just going to see how this goes.
Good. Thank you also for being willing. I know it's a vulnerable thing to share about your brain injury. And thank you for being willing to step in. For our listeners, I want to let you know we had a previous guest lined up that was not able to do it. And Jasmine was willing to step in on this episode. So it takes bravery to share your story, and it takes courage to even be able to, say it out loud. I remember when I first had my injury, it was really hard to talk about. And now you guys probably can't even picture that because we're on episode 101 of talking about my brain injury. But there was a time when I did feel that way, and I still feel that way about some of the more I like the word fragile, use fragile parts of my story. I don't share everything on here until it's been a little while, And so, can you share a little bit about just your journey in your concussion and kind of what led you here?
Yeah. So my concussion journey, right? The vocabulary that we usually use. I had two head injuries back to back. One from slipping down some stairs and I think hitting my head on a rock wall. And then 2 weeks later, I was attacked on just like a downtown street and knocked unconscious. And again, with think, I hit my head on the sidewalk. At first, I thought it would be like any other injury, just a couple of weeks of rest and I'd be back to normal. But weeks turned into months. And months have passed into over a year. And even today, I still deal with noise sensitivity and memory issues and exhaustion so deep that it feels impossible to function some days. Suddenly, I found myself, with things that used to feel like they defined me, my ability to work, my sharpness, my independence, those all were slipping away. And I had no idea if they were ever coming back again.
Thank you for sharing. You said that deep fatigue. And it's for those who've had brain injuries, I think you know what we're talking about. It's like every cell of your body feels heavy. I don't know if that's just kind of how it feels, but you shared. I like how you use the word that you felt like. Well, I don't like that you felt this way, but how you described it as slipping away. Can you talk a little bit more about that and just like how your life was impacted?
Yeah. When you first go through something that shatters your world, right? And for me, it felt like these head injuries really shattered my world. But whether it be brain injury, illness, or grief, you realize really fast that isolation will eat you alive. Um, I come from a really big family where I'm really fortunate that connection was just sort of built in. It wasn't something I've ever had to think about. It's something that was just there. But after my injury, it was like my brain couldn't compute that anymore. The relationships, my family and my friends, I had, perhaps taken for granted. The relationships that were supposed to just be automatic suddenly felt really out of reach. I knew that they were there, but I couldn't figure out how to engage. I really just didn't know how to bridge that gap. And that's one of the most isolating parts of my recovery. It wasn't that I lost connection with others. It was that I lost my sense of how to connect. And honestly, that's really why I care so much about this, because connection isn't just a luxury. It's really the thing in my view that helps to get us through. At the beginning, I tried to pretend I was just fine. I used to try and be the person that just didn't make a lot of noise when something was wrong. And so I didn't want to admit how much I was struggling. People don't see brain injuries the way that they see a broken arm or a cast. So when I couldn't keep up, when I was constantly feeling exhausted or overwhelmed, it started to feel like I was letting people down. Some relationships, faded. I learned really quick who could handle the long haul and who couldn't. And that hurt. But at the same time, some connections really deepened. The people that did stay and the ones who continue to check in, who show up even when I'm not at my best and I'm having a bad brain day. Those people have become my lifeline.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think something that so many people that have brain injury and families and caregivers experience is changing of relationships. And I like how you said that it wasn't even necessarily like the connection that changed it, but it was your ability to. I'm not, how did you phrase that again?
um, I see memory issues.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the connections itself didn't change. It was how I engaged with the connection.
Yeah, how you engaged, how you engaged. Yeah. And brain injury affects, for the survivor, it affects how we engage with the world in general. I've said this before, but it's like the filters coming in and the filters going out are cloudy and changed. So it's like you might still be you deep down, but you're not acting like you, right? Or it's like you still have love and care for people, but you're not expressing it the way maybe you used to. I know that sometimes friendships, I've had a lot of ups and downs in my journey, and there's been times that I have had friends that they got offended that I didn't answer their texts. And I've tried to tell them, hey, like, I am having a flare up. And one of the things I have learned to say, took me a lot of mistakes to get to this place, but I've had to learn to say that if I don't answer your text, it's more about my relationship with my phone, not my relationship with you. It's not like, or if I forget something, people interpret forgetting as not caring, like you didn't care to remember. But I literally have a cognitive deficit that I forget. So whether I care or not, I'm going to forget stuff. And so the people that, there are people that are not willing to see beyond it. And that can be really hurtful. And I've lost friendships and lost connections over it. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really like how you said our ability to engage. So, what are some ways that you were able to learn how to engage with connection again through your journey?
I am still learning. I'm still trying to figure that out. Um, and I mean, there are days where I absolutely admire your experience. And I know that it's been a hard road. But just recognizing like, oh, this is a good way to say that. I think I'm still at a point where I'm going through a lot of those trial and errors. Um, for me, you know, last year was really finding and joining a support group. I didn't want to join a support group at first.
Well, because then you admit you need support, right?
Yeah, that's not
It's a hard
an
step.
easy thing.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing for me at all. And I I think back, I was reflecting as we were sort of talking through this podcast today. Back then, I didn't see myself as one of those people who needed a support group, which is an
Who are those
awful,
people?
yeah, it's an awful way to think about it.
No, but it's true. Thank you for being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But honestly, once I did engage with a group, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like being in a space where people got it, like I didn't have to explain or justify what I was going through. Everybody on the call had like some way that they connect back or that they could share my experience. And that was huge. It was so huge for me. That wasn't something I had, experienced in person life whatsoever. And so to connect in a virtual setting was, yes, honestly life changing. um, it wasn't just about getting support though. It was about giving it too. So for me, when, I feel like I'm in survival mode, it's super easy for me to feel powerless. And that's how I felt right before I engaged with some of the groups. But when I help someone else, even in a smaller way, it helped remind me that I still mattered. Like I still was able to give back in some capacity.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think, thank you for acknowledging that it's hard to recognize you need a support group or want to join a support group. Some people are very adverse to the language support group because they're like, it means admitting there's, something wrong and maybe they don't want to admit that, or maybe they're willing to admit it, but they don't necessarily want to engage. But anybody who's had a brain injury or any family member who's been part of a brain injury, I like how you pointed out that part of what you get from it is encouraging others. And there
Mm-hmm.
are so many people who come to our groups that are years out from their injury, that their purpose in being there is to encourage others. And in doing so, they become encouraged themselves and their experience means something. And so there's something about connecting with others, not just to get support, but also to be the one who's there giving it, because there might be somebody there that could relate to what you've gone through. And so, Jasmine, you came to my group
Yeah.
last year. Is that the group you were talking about, or
Yep. Yep.
okay? I was like, I wasn't sure if you had gone to any others. But yeah. So I mean, how did you? I've never even really asked you that. Like, how did you find like my Hope After Head Injury group, and like when did you start coming?
So it was about last summer. So the summer of 2024, I had just started and quit a job because it was just, I wasn't ready to go back to work. And so I was in a pretty dark place where I didn't feel like I knew myself anymore. Right. And I feel like I'm in a stage in my life where I should know that. I should be more comfortable with myself. And that's just not how I felt at that point. And so I actually had a therapist recommend recommend your group. And she was like, hey, I don't know much about this, but it could be an interesting way for you to engage and just hear some stories of others that are going through this. Again, in my in-person life, that feels so odd. In my day-to-day life, brain injury is not a topic of conversation. I don't have a lot of people that I would even know who have had a brain injury or can acknowledge that they've had some sort of concussion or whiplash, any of that type of stuff. And so seeing that there was a space that existed where it was sort of a come one, come all, no matter the shape of your brain injury, was great.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that you found us. And I'm, I don't want to say selfishly glad, but I am, because last year was when I was taking very intentional steps towards starting Hope Survives as a nonprofit. And I just knew that it was what the Lord had. And I filed for incorporation knowing very, very little about business, but I knew I felt ready. And I mentioned at one of the groups that, hey, we're planning to launch a nonprofit next year called Hope Survives. We want to expand our support groups, expand our programs. If you guys would just pray for us, and I'll keep you guys updated. I got an email from Jasmine after the group saying, hey, I have some experience in this, and I, paraphrasing, have been looking for something to volunteer. Would you like to talk about this, or is there any way I can help? And I was like, yes, let's get on the phone tomorrow. So I got on the phone with her and we started talking, and Jasmine has become the most amazing, amazing support for Hope Survives. She has done so much for our organization, and we're 100% volunteer run at this point. We have not raised enough to be paid. So Jasmine and I are both working basically the equivalent of a full-time job, volunteer. And Jasmine, I genuinely, and I want to publicly honor you and acknowledge, you are complete answer to prayer.
Well,
I did not know how to do the things that you have known how to do. And I'm executive director, you're managing director. You manage me most of the time, keep me on track. And I'm just so grateful. And so I could go on and on about how grateful I am for everything you've done for Hope Survives. But I just want to ask you, how has being involved with Hope Survives impacted you, or your, connection with connection?
yeah, no, of course. So yeah, if I think back to last fall and sort of sending that initial email, I came in thinking that I was just going to help Hope Survive. I was just going to help Cristabelle and your community that you've built out, and that's something totally external from me. And as it turns out, the community has helped me just as much, and I am very deep in part of this community. It's really given me a sense of purpose again. It reminded me that my skills and my experience and, even the hard stuff that I've been through could be used for something so much bigger than myself. And I think more than anything, it's shown me that healing isn't just about recovering alone. It's really about building something with others. And I think that's what I'm most excited about, and continue to be excited about every day when you and I log in.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that's really, the heart of Hope Survives, right? Our vision is for every survivor of brain injury and every member of their family to be seen and heard and loved and supported and valued and uplifted and never alone. Those words were chosen intentionally because I don't want anyone to feel isolated. I remember what it's like to feel isolated. I don't want anyone to feel that way. I don't want any family to be scrambling to find resources or to find help. So I don't want anyone to feel isolated, and never wanted anyone to feel alone. And Jasmine has that heart. You don't want anyone to feel that way either, right? And everyone on our board of directors, we really believe in the power of connection. We really believe healing happens in community. And Jasmine, I love that you were willing to share your story, because you're such an example of that. And if I can just encourage you, like, all your skills and talents every day, I feel like you're so overqualified for this for this job. I mean, first of all, not only if it's volunteer, but second of all, you execute things so well. You are able to take a jumbled mess of me saying, "Hey, I have this idea," and then come up with a document that makes sense. And that's a skill. That's an amazing skill to be able to have and to be able to do well. And so we are so grateful. Hope Survives is so grateful to have you. I'm so sorry you had a brain injury and that's how you ended up here. But I'm so grateful that it could be something that could bring you purpose because you are encouraging others. I mean, our Hope ambassadors and our community advisory council and all of our members of our support groups in our communities, for them to know that, hey, we're also with you in this that are running these groups. And so, yeah, I haven't asked you this, and this wasn't in the pre planned questions, but I would like to ask you what aspect of our programming that we've announced are you most excited about?
Um, Honestly, there's a couple. I think back to our launch plan of things, right? Like what is the minimal amount of things that we want to make sure is available to our community? And honestly, I think I'm excited about every single one. If I have to narrow it down though, and if I have to think back to what the early days of my injury looked like and what would have been most helpful to me, I am so excited for honestly the downloadable resources. Way back in the first couple of days, I don't think I was ready to engage with anybody and talk about anything. But knowing that there would have been, a handout or something I could have used to jot down my thoughts, I think would have been super helpful, right? Like we have some journaling prompts and that type of stuff at this point. As I think through last summer, there's no way I could have come as far as I have today without the Zoom support groups. And even our workshops that we're planning for later this month or next year, I feel like what we're building out is helping me along my own journey. And so I'm excited for each and every one of them as I progress as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, and of course, you know about some of the stuff we haven't announced yet. So it's like, we're planning other programs and workshops and things and using our own experiences through brain injury as well as ideas from our volunteers. So if any of you guys are listening and you're like, how can I get involved? Well, you can go to hopesurvives.org/get involved. We would love to hear from you as well. So yeah, as we're getting to wrap up, Jasmine, what does hope mean to you?
I spent some time trying to think through like how do I try and distill this down. And so I'll share something, but I want to make sure everybody understands that to me, hope is so much more than just this. But for me, hope isn't something that's passive. It's not some wishful thinking kind of thing. It's not just wanting things to get better. It's choosing to believe that they will, even when you can't see it. For me, hope meant waking up every day and deciding to keep going, even when I wasn't sure or I'm not sure how. It meant trusting that the story wasn't over, even when it felt like it did. So for me, hope is action. It's showing up. It's fighting for yourself, even when it's messy, even when it's slow and chaotic.
Wow, that was really beautiful. That's really beautifully said. Yeah, I can't even add anything to it. I love that. I like how you use the word even when it's messy because life with brain injury, it is not neat and tidy. Jasmine and I have been talking about how we're both struggling these weeks since we did our launch and just working so many hours trying to get everything together and with our own symptoms, balancing. It's hard day by day to live with brain injury and to not only balance the stuff that has to be done, like showering's not optional, You know, dishes are not optional. You know, eating is not optional. And so it's like trying to balance not only just like living, but also anything above that can be just a lot with a brain injury. And so if you're listening to this, I just hope that you know that you're not alone. There is connection for you. This is the power of connection, healing. It happens in community, and there are people here that love you and that are there to wrap our arms around you and say you're not alone. I often invite people to our support groups, and I have written on our like emails and in our things, I always say camera on or off, your choice. I always tell people you can talk on camera or just write in the chat, because I want our support groups to be accessible. And so we are now having 2 facilitators for each group, an on-camera facilitator and a chat facilitator that is facilitating the discussion that happens in the Zoom chat, because some of you I know might not be comfortable or want to be on camera, and you can just listen and tune in. And that is a way to connect, right? Even downloading one of our downloadable resources, as Jasmine mentioned, is a way to connect, a way to know that you're not alone and there is help out there for you. So is there anything you'd like to add before we get to our final words of encouragement?
No, I think what you shared was amazing. And yes, I'm super excited to have any and all of the folks join our communities in whatever way feels right for them.
Yeah, whatever way is right for you. I love that. So, final words of hope for our listeners.
You are not alone. Stealing your tagline a little bit there.
Our tagline, everyone's tagline.
I know it feels like you are sometimes, but you're not. And if no one else tells you this today, I am so proud for you, of you for making it this far. Just keep going, even if it's slow, even if it feels messy and chaotic. Just keep going. We can't wait to see you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for sharing some of your story and encouraging others, and for being part of Hope Survives. We are all so grateful for you. So thank you guys for listening and being here at the podcast. We want to remind you that our workshops and programs are open for registration right now, and our support groups are open for registration. You can find everything at hopesurvives.org. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Hope Survives podcast. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, and would love for you to consider leaving us a rating or a review. Check out hopesurvives.org for more. We'll see you next time, and remember, there is always hope.